Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and oh boy, today I tell you, actually this whole weekend, I have been on a death march like I have rarely seen in years over a plugin that I'm releasing today. Technically it is out already, because this is one of those ones that I build on GitHub rather than make all those little packages of things and make all that stuff work. And welcome to Airwindows Meter 022. So here's the thing. Airwindows Meter is about showing you stuff in interesting ways. You see it sort of poking along there. If I hit play, or indeed this little reset bit up here, you see that I've got a peak energy meter. I've got a detail meter, and I've got a zero cross meter. And I put some additional labels on those. The peak meter now says intensity, quote, peaks, and detail says detail, parentheses, slew, and fullness is fullness, parentheses, zero cross, because that's what this stuff is really about. But you might also notice some letters sitting over here and a new score. And that's because that's what this death march has been about. I'm continuing to work on trying to come up with hit record measuring. And it ain't quite working, but it's becoming even more interesting. Let me tell you exactly what's going on here. I will maybe get that going. I'll be padding that, and for some of the later stuff, I'm not even going to be showing sound at all. So what we've got here is a tiny continuing sound. And this N, L, and B, which is now A, also shows here, is the maximum setting for that particular meter. And what it tells me is the amplitude of my sounds is not doing super great. This is not a great score as far as having stuff happening in an interesting way up here. We're kind of sparse and also clipped all at the same time. This section is also not terribly bright. I could turn up the brights even more. At the cost of making more of these overslew things happen when they come in. But that's one way of getting more stuff happening in the slew area. Or I could pull them back. And now things are becoming sort of darker. I'm using BezEQ on this. And I can also pull back this bit in the bottom, A here. And it's going to make those dots smaller. Technically, to do it, I have to actually be turning down the bass, so watch this. And we can make those dots smaller. They are also serving a purpose of I've got markings here for where the bass actually goes, which could prove useful. And the idea here is balancing kinds of sound in a useful way. And this is a great example of it. So one thing I could do is center this again and pick a different kind of noise. Sort of a rock and roll-y kind of thing. This is the mix that I did using the old console MD. Has some problems. I didn't have this technology to check this stuff out. So I've got too much lows and too much highs and too loud all at the same time. Because I guess I just rolled that way. Sad, but it's the truth. So what we can do is pull that down
whistle to fly.
Bring all these things in.
All our fancies painted.
In fact, I can turn it down a bit as well.
Life revealed
And we see that we're hitting a balance that says FFD.
Turn to doubt and pain. Tell me who's the true love.
So what you wind up doing is figuring out how to do a mix where the frequencies sit. You don't have to just listen for them. You can see where stuff goes on the meter. So I'm tired of listening to my stuff. I have so much else to explain that there's no point in even getting into that. So now that we have the meter cleaned up and able to see what's going on with it again, this rating is nothing but these things, in this case F, F, and D. What that means is fullness, and ideally I'd be doing this in a mix rather than just playing with EQs on it. Fullness is arguably a little bit too much for what I was doing with it. I would be turning some of that stuff down. I had the loudness, the cloud of peaks, and the detail balancing fairly well. Note that what I was doing was clipping both of those things. Because here's the thing. With airwindows meter, and this is why it's taking me some time to explain all of this, you are looking to evaluate clouds of information rather than just if you clip the slew, it becomes A, and that's as far as it goes. That's not how that works. Instead, it's looking for whether there's a cloud of information in here. Like if I did turn this bed back on, you would see
Tell me who's the true love.
clipping and also a cloud of information. If we turn everything down quite a bit, we could make it not overslew quite as much, but it's still doing a fair bit. You might also notice that some of the dots are larger than others. This is extending a thing that the original airwindows meter did in peaks. It was doing a thing where, let me stop this for a moment, you can still see the bits. It was doing a thing where the peaks in the top meter were sort of the intensity of sonority of the sound that you were getting. And the loudness calculation was mostly not so much about clipping stuff off the top of the meter, but making a dense cloud of stuff happening up at the top 6 dB or so. And this is classic record making in that this is the recipe of like the Beatles and so on. All manner of acts have done that because that's what the technology did back in the time. And it sounds better than just hard clipping everything. So you're looking for a dense cloud of peaks, and that's what makes this letter go up. It'll go up all the way to A. If it has gone up to A, you have a really aggressively loud sounding thing, even if it's not clipping, because it's a burst of information all right up at the top here. By the same token, if you have a burst of information right up here, even if it has not gone past to do these overslew things in here, that's going to be bright sounding. It's sort of 80s style bright. It's not modern digital sounding bright. It's just that wash of glittery highs. And if you have a really dense cloud of stuff and there are large red dots in this case in the treble, then this will go up to A as well. You'll notice that I'm not anywhere near it. And that's because this isn't a very good mix. And then lastly, it was pretty trivial to make fullness go to A. That's because that was my mistake with doing the mix. And currently is at D. If you have a bass-starved mix, you'll barely see any large dots at all. If you're doing like burial, then you see large, dense areas of blue down here, hopefully not much below 30 hertz if you are handling things properly. It can be fairly, you can run reference stuff through this and see what it does. And Again, the number for that, all of these things were calibrated to different things. In this case, it literally is calibrated to burials, track pirates, and pirates maxes out at A on the fullness meter, which doesn't mean you can't take a sound and max it out more. And turn on the meter. And then all we have to do is push it really hard. And the next thing you know, you have a huge dense area down there, and it will make its way to A, as you can see. Well, also kind of lacking in high frequencies, even though you can hear there are some Hadson things there, but they're not sitting in a useful place. They're just being a little bit of overslew, and then not much else is happening in the mix. Some of this ends up going to arrangement as far as getting that stuff working. And that meter is about giving you the tools for having those thoughts of what you do with something like, I'm not getting a sense of air in my mix, or my mix is not full enough, or it is too full, like you're seeing in this area down here, and it's not translating. It sounds completely terrible in big woofers or whatever. And this will tell you, again, you can go for burial for reference to that. But I have other references as well. Because you see, I have gone, and here, let me check. 1, 3, 6. I have taken the last couple of days with the aid of Reaper, which is able to run plugins at like 36 times natural speed if you're just doing mixdowns with them. And Meter will run that way, although I think it's a little bit wonky, but as long as it's consistent with what it's doing, I'm cool with it. And I have done 1,369 individual songs through Meter to see what the end result gave me. And here is my top hits, and they go and go, and I left out some of the ones in the middle. See, this is as many as I've got, except for I have more than this, because I only kept the ones in the very bottom and the ones in the very top, because I know people are going to want to use this as a get a high score meter. Everybody always has. And you can use those ones on the side, like boop back over to here. You can use F, E, and A as high score meters if you want. You might notice in the Finder window there that Deadmau5 has successfully done that with strobe. When you run strobe through this meter, each of the meters ends up pegging at complete max, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Like you can run Livin' La Vida Loca through here, and in fact, I think I may even have that. Yep. And if you run Livin' La Vida Loca through there, you get a grade of E, and the numbers are Q, O, and H, because everything is so clipped that nothing registers. You have to have information in the windows of these meters. In other words, what you see here, peaks can't be clipped off the top, or they won't be read as density creating for what we're counting. Details can't be clipped off into the overslew region, or they don't count as the kind of full, rich brightness detail that we're used to hearing. And then fullness can just max out pretty easily. There's a fair number of even classic rock bands where, think like Allman Brothers, nothing but fullness. They have nothing else going on for them whatsoever. Just the entire sound is nothing but fullness. It maxes this out, and then there's no detail because it's too old, and there isn't as many peaks as you'd think because it is not loudinated. But yeah, we've got these listings here for things that for one reason or another did not rank high on this meter. And I'm going to tell you something important if you're trying to use that for this kind of reason. F, E, and A here, these you need to hit the button up here, which doesn't show up very much. Maybe there'll be the button's up here, to reset everything, and then it will start counting. It'll start counting from Z and go on up as the sort of scores rise, given how hard you're pushing each of these areas of the meter. And they will go up to a maximum of A, and they can't go any farther than that. And they will never go down unless you click this button and start over, because they are tracking maximum across the entire song. They only ooch up as you go. But if you hear explosions, it's because it's 4th of July. I'm not setting off fireworks in the street. I'm setting off fireworks in your mind. And it'll take as long as I need to do a proper explanation for this, because this is also going to be what people see when they look up how to use this meter. So yeah, these things, F, E, and A, which get shown in this rating, I've been copying that rating over to each of the records that I analyzed. Each of these only grades up as it goes. You would think that rated would also grade up, but it does not. It is weird and frisky and rather challenging, because what it is doing is it is looking for the minimum disparity between these things. That rating is looking for balance. It's looking for these letters to be the same letter, even though they're somewhere between A and Z, right? And rated is, to some extent at least, it's not an exact letter assignment to the purpose. Rated is essentially picking which of the three is the biggest disparity between that and using that as the maximum spread among these three things. So you're always, like, if the peaks is the highest and the fullness is the lowest, well, it's looking at that as the disparity, and that becomes your rating. But then there's a couple of corrections. If you have two of those the same, like say it's, right now it's FEA, suppose it was FFA or FAA, then what you would end up doing is getting a boost on the rating because it likes it when stuff matches. It's shooting for getting everything to match as closely as possible. So then there is an additional thing, which you can see when I go back to the Finder window and show you the high scores that things have got. If the first two things, peaks and slew, match, and we're not talking just the peak level matches the slew level, because that's shown in the color and size of the blue dot up top here. That's an individual thing. We're talking about if the areas of density of the dots match. And I redid the code specifically to do this better, because what I had before was trying to do it and it wasn't doing a very good job of it. And I managed to improve how closely it watches that stuff. And so we can keep a pretty close track of how dense with action the high frequencies are, how dense with action the loudness is, and then how dense with action the high frequencies are, in a way that is not just single things that you can't barely hear going into overslewing, but it's like stuff that is the bulk of the sound. And you'll note that if I was to play bits of this again and shut off this thing, and I have to get this going, I've been muting it so that I can. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got two eyes for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got two eyes for me. Don't mind me fiddling with this so that it will make a cloud of dots. It's being a little bit bulky. It is on. Okay, here we go. So you'll notice that now I've turned everything down because it's an incredibly bright mix. I'm still getting some overslewing, but we're seeing the big red dots in this meter. Certain tracks, Like, for instance, I dialed this in around the Police track Roxanne because I started getting that working. And then I discovered if I played the intro to Roxanne, all of a sudden my Slew meter was exploding with information. And I went, oh, that's an ear-catching song. People immediately know that it's playing as soon as it starts up, and they go, oh my God, Roxanne, yay! And isn't it neat if that is a kind of telegraphing of part of the sound, that you can get attention by having a lot going on in this area here? And that is what happens when you start playing Roxanne over this meter off of the vinyl record, which is what I got it off of, it's just this explosion of interesting detail happening, and it catches the ear and it gets your attention. Similar things happen with bass in like Burial and so on. And because we're trying to balance out the intensity of the loudness with the intensity of having stuff like this happen, we're so interested in having these two letters match that there's a special boost where it'll add a plus to whatever it is that you've got if you have that condition happening. And then if you've got if they don't match, but it's like BEB, that still gives you a one letter bump to the score. Similarly, if like the E and A was an E and an E, that would also be something matching. And so you get a bump in the score. And the goal is to have all of the stuff matching. Here's the thing that is not immediately obvious. These only get to go up, but they can go up and force themselves out of balance, at which point your score goes down. And it might very well be that you're working on a mix or something with this and going, oh, hey, I got an A rating. Wait, it's an F. What happened? And it's a fair question, like, what happened? How could it be doing more? I added more and then it got worse. It's because you broke your balance. It's a very delicate thing to be happening. And it's also breaking things down into individual letters, kind of like alphanumeric quantization. And in so doing, you can throw things way out of whack with certain kinds of imbalance. Like if we had B and I've been doing these record things for days. I'm exhausted. So let me just not start talking about that. Instead, let's start looking at real-world examples of how this works. And we're looking here at the low end, my very lowest scorers. This one is an old Bruce Springsteen record that was completely covered with surface noise. It was nothing but record crackle. As you see, it says FKAI. Well, it's not really A. That was the surface noise, and it was so overwhelming that everything was just a sea of and so this doesn't measure properly. This one, EOIF, very good song, Marvin Gaye, Inner City Blues Make Me Wanna Holler. It's a top 10 hit. Unfortunately, this particular track off of this particular record had so much bass coming across and so much fullness coming across, and it didn't really have much happening else in it, and it didn't have a lot of highs. And so all this other stuff just dropped out. Not dissimilarly to Pink Floyd, Remember a Day. David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World. Kind of similar. Not particularly new records. They're kind of dark. Steely Dan's Ricky, Don't Lose That Number is a special case. That is one on which Timothy Schmid, the singer who joined the Eagles, bass player and singer who joined the Eagles, was playing marimba on this. And the marimba that they have on it is filling up the low end so much that it swamps everything. And it makes meter upset. You've got too much rumble. The rumble makes it think, oh no, everything is nothing but bass. And Allman Brothers, same deal. EKEB, they're nothing but bass and fullness. There's no detail, no clarity to them. It's a fairly common thing. But if we go up to the top, we can start seeing things like this is the best out of my collection. So what you're seeing is like the 1% or less of the biggest of hits as far as what meter thinks counts as hits. And it's quite interesting what I got to, because previously there was no way that I could get anything remotely quiet to seem significant in any way. It was only chasing the loudest rock and roll stuff and so on. And so you'd have like everything off of the Dead Kennedys' debut album, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, was apparently the biggest hit ever because it was the loudest thing ever, and is very good at doing that. So what I've got here is Ghosts and Stuff and Strobe as Dead Mouse tracks, which are modern and off of a CD, and he does his job well enough that they don't turn into the Ricky Martin of just being completely saturated and dead. Instead, everything registers. We've also got Burial's Endorphin. That's coming in at plus a CCA. Again, if those two things match, I add a plus to it and I count them extra. And a lot of these things show up in this way. Close to the Edge is about as close to ultimate as you can get for being human beings playing anything. Time in a Word is surprisingly close as well. Foo Fighters snuck in there with Best of You. Some of the Foo Fighters is over-loudinated, and so it doesn't register as high. And yes, it's Heart of the Sunrise. The sound that they were going for really was kind of the essence ultimate of this. Funny note on that, I chose to ignore the reprise of We Have Heaven, the John Anderson track that it bursts into after it finishes, because it got legitimately straight up to plus A, and the letters it hit were D, D, D. And if you let it continue to play so that the door slam happens and We Have Heaven bursts in 6 times as loud as everything, the brightness of that track breaks this rating. It goes to DCD, and that makes it be A rather than plus A, because the first 2 letters don't match anymore. And that's part of how that works, that if you knock things off balance, the score will go down. It won't just stay up, it'll go down. And that is a semi-legitimate way of thinking about this kind of thing, because this is a picture of all of these things run, and you can see that as we continue onwards, we're emphasizing these ones with the letters that match, and the fullness letter tends to sneak back down again. For instance, Prince's Computer Blue, another ultimate massive hit sound, and it is EEH. So the fullness on that 80s record isn't quite as big as like Dark Side of the Moon, for instance. But then we do literally have Dark Side of the Moon here, but that does not have AA for the first letters, because it simply can't become as loud as all that. And we can sneak downwards and see that we have a whole bunch of these, and there's some surprises, there's some ringers, like Drive-In Saturday showed up there. I don't know why, it just did. Ziggy Stardust is the highest rating. Let's see, and I can also do this. Let's just search this for Bowie, and it is not sorting the way I would like, so let's give it a list. So apparently it thinks Drive-In Saturday is the hottest Bowie hit ever. This is it not a perfect system. But here's how we're arranging some of these things. As we go. It also thinks Sound and Vision is a big deal. It's also going Stay and Ashes to Ashes are considered big hits. And then we are continuing to sort of go downwards from there to the ones where it's not very impressed. Sometimes because it like For instance, Heroes is loud beyond anything else. So it's got some fullness, it's got some brightness, but mostly it's just being loud, so it goes out of balance. This is all about whether the thing has balance rather than whether it's the loudest thing or not. We can do, what else would be good? I know, here's a fun one, Genesis. So if we search for Genesis, might as well give those final things. Apparently it thinks Ken Utility and the Coastliners is the hottest hit ever. But then you get Harold the Barrel, and then interestingly, the lead track on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. No other measurement would cause that to pop out of the till first, but this apparently is doing it. Then we've got Illegal Alien, that's all, and Turn It On Again, and so on, some of the 80s stuff. And again, loudness calculations aren't going to make these jump out like that. Also notice that Supper's Ready also rates very highly here. It's the same kind of thing as if you're measuring all of Close to the Edge. It is continuing to track the peak amounts of these various things, brightness, fullness, loudness, and can only edge each of those things up. But here's the thing, in order to maximize on this kind of behavior, when you are bumping something up, you have to bump the related things up as well. Like if you're suddenly going louder, it also has to go brighter enough to compensate for it. Otherwise, it'll sound like it's gone out of balance and isn't hitting that magical combination. And again, when we talk about magical combination, we're basically talking, the plus here, these are all the ones where those two first parts balance better than anything. But, and they continue to go even as we get to very low amplitude levels. Look, we've got an Eagles track, Those Shoes, which balances that well. Interestingly, Steely Dan's Katie Lied, although it has technical problems that get in the way, is their masterwork in certain ways, because some of that stuff is so perfectly balanced. We got Ashes to Ashes, we got I Shot the Sheriff, and Green Earrings. A couple of Grateful Dead tracks. James Taylor, Mexico, shows up in this plus A ranking simply because it balances that well the amplitude energy with the high frequency energy. And it gives you that magical balance of everything being pretty much perfectly right. Joni Mitchell does that pretty much with her voice alone. The sound of that is so perfectly balanced that it just pegs this meter. Donald Fagen's IGY was previously left in the doldrums of, well, this is really quiet, isn't it? The peaks on this are like 18, 24 dB, hotter than the RMS. Nobody's ever going to hear this as a hit record. How could you measure that? Well, this is how I can measure it. By tracking the density of the clouds being produced by each of those things, by volume peaks and also the slew events associated with those, and tracking the density of all those things and seeing if they go together. That's what this does. And then right down at the bottom, note that IGY is one of your triple threats, much like Beastie Boys' Shadrach immediately above it. It has the peaks. The clouds of peaks are perfectly at the right density, and then the clouds of high frequency information is also at the exactly matching density, and then the fullness and bass depth is also at the matching density. And here's what you get, Michael Cimbello immediately above it. It sounds like everything is just perfectly mastered and mixed, that it's done exactly right, just how you'd want it. And then we've got another section where it still matches, but the other element is so far out of whack that it's actually a lower plus letter. Here we've got another Beatles track altogether now. We've got AC/DC. Formerly, I wasn't able to get AC/DC to register in any of these meters because they didn't tend to go loud enough. Nor did you really find that the Mutt Lange produced super hit AC/DC metered any better than like formerly done stuff. Note, however, that we do have AC/DC Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and that was with Bon Scott. But I mean, you know that song, right? Not surprising to consider that to be a massive hit. And we scooch downwards and see more AC/DC right there. And then here's a classic, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. It didn't jump out for anything until I looked at this meter, and then it like, oh, hey, I ran the numbers, and here's one of the bigger hits, the fix. Here's another one of the bigger hits. And then when we finally get past, we got some James Brown, more Steely Dan from Katy Lied. It's astonishing. A Tom Petty hit. This is all in the top region of this meter's measurement that I'm scrolling around through. And some of them might look like ringers, but some of them, this is the highest rating Mahavishnu orchestra that I had, at least currently, because I only had a small selection, but not more than 3 or 4. But this was my favorite. This Joni Mitchell track. Joni Mitchell was quite interesting, because if we were to search, what we see is that Chord and Spark is what this meter considers her best. And then also River. And then also The Last Time I Saw Richard, both off of Blue. Then California. Then A Case of You. And then it goes and looks up the only actual hit on this list that charted. I don't know why that is. It's still rated quite high. It's AIKI. So it's still a very highly scoring thing. It's not being scored in the B or C tier or whatever. But yeah, it put the only hit at the bottom of the list. I don't know what to make of that. Meter is apparently a hipster. Meter only likes Joni stuff that isn't the big sellout hit stuff, man. And yeah, we've got James Taylor in here showing up just fine, even though it's up against like rock tracks and things. We've got a huge Bruce Springsteen hit from the Born in the USA album. We've got a Talking Heads track that is super Talking Heads. One of the things that's funny about this area and this way of metering is that it's bringing up the artists at their most. Like here's Stevie Wonder, You Can't Judge a Book by His Cover. There's plenty of other stuff with Stevie Wonder in here. But these are tracks that sound very much like those artists. Here's a Talking Heads track, Drugs. It considers this to be a super high score, and that's because it is so well balanced in those first 2 counts. You can even get much quieter songs that still pull this trick, like Grateful Dead, Truckin' off of, I guess it's Working Man's Dead, unless it was American Beauty. It's a Rolling Stones track, Jigsaw Puzzle. It's probably the first one there, although we can easily look that up and find out. Like, this is my collection to look in. Yeah, there we go. So what we're looking at in Rolling Stones, in this case, it did kind of manage to sort the hits to the top. I can never count upon it to do that. It doesn't understand what a note is, and it doesn't understand what a dollar is either, or a sale. So we're basically trying to do this entirely mechanically, and it's still pulling it off fairly well. So Beast of Burden, it thinks is the top of the world. It'll give a shot for Wild Horses, sneaks Jigsaw Puzzle in there. It's a reasonably popular track, I suppose. And then Shattered, and then we are working our way down. Sympathy for the Devil is also quite high. And we just kind of keep going from there. But yeah, when we start getting into the non-plus ones, and the plus ones can go as far as like Grateful Dead's Friend of the Devil counts as something special, even though it's wildly out of balance. Like it is the brightness and loudness is about as low as you can get. It's down at K. But then the fullness count for it is A, which is so way out of balance, but we throw this plus in just because these two parts balance. And sure enough, this is a very classic Grateful Dead song. This technique found something interesting there. Also, it thinks Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, with Greg Lake singing a hymn, is apparently the heightenedness of... well, here's a cute trick. I will fire this search thing up again. Oh, and we'll search final. So we do this. Now we're looking at Robert Palmer and ELP at the same time. And it thinks Robert Palmer is a bigger hit, although funnily enough, it doesn't like his biggest hit as much as all that. It really likes Pressure Drop, and it really likes Looking for Clues, which does count as a hit. In fact, it's sorting Johnny and Mary over certain other things. And we're counting Sneak and Sally fairly high. But yeah, ELP is showing up with this essentially ballad here. And, pardon the explosions. And we're kind of working our way down with that. But yeah, as we start getting into the non-plus region, we start getting into the region where the disparity between the different letters matters more and more. Because what's happening, say, look at this down there where it says ADD Prince Let's Go Crazy, which is a huge hit. So this is still finding some hits. It's finding Sticks Come Sail Away. That's a huge hit. Sugarloaf, Green-Eyed Lady. That's a huge hit. But while Let's Go Crazy is continuing, it doesn't start right at ADD. It's off of Purple Rain. Purple Rain is an 80s record that has a lot of dynamic range. And one of the things notable about Prince's track is it starts up and immediately it's balanced. It's like going, hi, I'm A plus, I'm A plus. And then all of a sudden, like, the fullness boops up a little bit. Whoa, I'm a C. No, I'm A. And then it's bouncing around like mad because what it's doing is tracking how good the balance is at any given moment. I should probably make some sort of little meter that shows you this as a graph as you listen to the music and see it going across. But that letter grade, the very first one that I'm sorting by, is going to bounce around like crazy. And my notion is if you're going with this particular concept where we're really trying to highlight things and finding the best tracks ever, rather than just go to a place where it's getting a high score and then it can do whatever it wants and it goes completely off, but we keep the high score because by gosh, it was A plus once, it's going to stay A plus forever. That's honestly not how music works. What'll happen is you're mixing your song and it's playing along and it's getting to the chorus and that's absolutely amazing. And then you go to a bridge or another verse or whatever and all the air sags out of it. And if I can show that on a meter, I can show a way in which it's like up and then all of a sudden, even though our maximum ratings didn't change, or perhaps you go to a chorus and you have overstuffed it with too much in the way of loud guitars. And so the first letter A, or maybe it's not A, the first letter peaks, spikes up out of position, and then your total score there drops down at that point because you've spoiled the music. It's going along perfectly. Then all of a sudden it's too thick, or it's too bright, or it's suddenly blaringly loud and it's not balanced. That is something of a downer. You'd want to have stuff balanced by, say, it gets loud, but then also a tambourine comes in and that brings the highs up. And these are all arrangement things that people do for getting this stuff to work. And when you do it properly, you get results like this, where it might bump around a little bit, but it's basically been an upward trajectory for all of these from the beginning. And those letter grades are way less sensitive than they were before. Like you're going to be, say, having extremely high scores. Like here's When Doves Cry, top 10 hit. It maxes out at HJJ. And that's fine. Even though H as a loudness measurement, this of course is normalized so that the loudest peak in any of these songs is always 1.0. All these songs are being measured at the point of them clipping just the tiniest bit. And if When Doves Cry isn't loudinated and its maximum peak is up there, and then the loudest area maxes out at H, that's fine, because these are still so closely related that it sounds right. You got Steve Perry, Oh Sherry, right next to that also sounds right. Police, this is a very empty, sparse Genesis track there. We can keep going on and on until we have extremely spacious things, like here's Billy Joel's The Stranger, here's Burial Untitled, Talkin' Heads track, This Must Be the Place, Naive Melody, that was a hit. Here's the Eagles' The Long Run, that was a massive hit. Here's Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke. It maxes out at JKJ, but you'll notice it's balanced, and that's why it's getting an A rating. This is a really workable way of going about doing this. And when we get down here, we're even slightly more out of balance. They're going to be over all different volume levels. For instance, this BABD here for the Beatles, It's All Too Much, or Tomorrow Never Knows, those are quite loud. Those are loud tracks. It's just that it's a little out of balance. This Beatles track is lacking a little bit in fullness. It's All Too Much is lacking a little bit in fullness. And although It's All Too Much is ABD, so it doesn't need much brightness, it's fine. But it needs a little fullness. It's a little thin. And then Tomorrow Never Knows could use a little more brightness, ironically, but then also fullness. The fullness on that track sounds awesome. That is the track where the rock kick drum was invented for the use of the Beatles. All this kind of stuff. There's a place for all of it. Here's Birthday. Birthday leans so heavily on being just loud rather than bright or full that it's kind of grating. And then here's Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter is measured CAE, similarly to Bat Out of Hell and Hot for Teacher. So that means it's not as loud as it might be, but it is as bright as it can be. Similarly to this Genesis track, Jethro Tull, this Yes track, those are all doing the same thing. They're brighter than they need to be, and that's what puts them out of balance. We can go down a little bit. Here is another track, Yes, Leave It, CGG. So it's getting a little bit of a boost from that, but it's louder than bright. And everything continues along these lines. We've got a lot of B tracks, like here's Aerosmith. We've got some hits, like Stevie Nicks, Edge of 17, top 10 hit, Wham. Wham is DHH, even though it is a track where the that doubly trick is used on the lead vocal. And that is still not oppressively bright because all the brightness is sitting in that zone in the meter rather than going into the overslew region. It's compressed the highs up to make that happen. And we have a giant pile of tracks that are being ordered in this rather special way by airwindows meter. So you can use this to try to get the high score. But what it's mostly about is being able to visualize what these three areas of sound are doing. What loudness and intensity of stuff happening, brightness and intensity of high frequency detail happening, and fullness and intensity of bass and solidness happening. And they're supposed to all balance out. So I don't think I've left enough space on my little card for doing my usual talk about the video that I'll post, which is probably going to be Born in the Bayou, nor the Forbidden Music, which is probably what it was going to be. I think I was going to do Eagles, Those Shoes, because it was another high score on this. And I wanted to illustrate what it looks like on a really good hit record when you see that little score, the rated B or whatever, sneaking up on its way to A and then to A+, or wherever it gets to, and where it spends time, what in the song causes it to jump, what in the song causes it to switch to a different section because something else happened that produced a musical event that pushed these, here it says BAA, it pushed these maximums to a new maximum, which then other sounds have to be able to compensate and balance for ramping up the energy in that way. And on that note, I am absolutely exhausted and have been talking for forever. I don't know if it was any use to you. I've tried my best to explain it, and really what you should do is put it on some tracks and start experimenting with it. See if you can kind of get a synesthetic thing off of it. The fact that it is this drawing pictures of your sound in ways that will hopefully help you understand what you're doing and how to do it to your preferred taste. And that's really the important part. It's not about getting a high score. Nobody cares. Nobody before this point would ever have known that a track like Mexico was getting a mechanical high score for the sound that it had. You would just have thought that it was a nice, open, spacious song that sounded decently clean and wasn't like loudinated or anything. I came up with a meter that could reveal the internal balance of some of these hit records, and that's the only way that I could have deadmau5's Strobe and like Back in Black sitting in the same bin for being successful. I'm going to go ahead to bed and I'll see whether I can continue any of this stuff. Thankfully, I don't have to continue measuring anything because I've measured my 1,300 tracks now and I don't have to do it again. Hopefully, I will find some other cool things to do. One of the things I'm thinking about is taking these letter things and a technique that I'm using with the ratings and stuff and making Console X show a RGB light, perhaps on the main fader's thumb detent, where it will show the balance of these things, always normalized to as close to full RGB as possible. So if it's showing a bright color, it means you're out of balance in that direction. And like if you were out of balance for loudness, I could have that be red. And if you were out of balance for fullness, that could be blue. And if you were out of balance for brightness, or fullness could be green, brightness could be blue. And then it would be showing colors constantly. And you'd be basically watching them flicker, but there'd be a hint as to what was happening. Anywho, no matter. I'll talk to you later. I'm going to go and sleep. Bye-bye.